You wake in a narrow stone cell before the sun clears the wall, and the first thing you notice through it is not fear, it is the smell of barley porridge. Down the corridor, dozens of other men are still asleep on straw mats, snoring like it is any other Tuesday, and by tonight, some of you will have fought in front of 50,000 strangers who paid real money to watch. But right now, in the dark, the thing on your mind is not dying. It is breakfast, because today, you are about to eat better than most of free Rome eats all week. You are a gladiator, and almost nothing about your morning looks like what you have been trained by movies to imagine. By tonight, you will have trained under a paid physician, eaten a diet engineered by professionals, and possibly walked out of the arena more famous than half the senators watching you from their marble seats. And here is the twist that should genuinely bother you. None of that, not the fame, not the physician, not the crowd chanting your name, will make you a citizen. Legally, right now, today, you are still almost nothing. So here is the question worth asking about the most misunderstood job in the ancient world. Was a gladiator a disposable slave, dragged into the sand to die for a crowd that did not care if he lived? Or something far stranger, a pampered, contracted, world-famous professional athlete who also happened to be legally almost invisible? Stay with me, because the honest answer is both, at the exact same time, and the gap between them is the whole story. Let's start with how you actually got here, because it will not go the way you expect. Yes, some gladiators were prisoners of war, and some were enslaved people sold into the schools, and some were criminals sentenced to the sand as a punishment with a sword attached. That version of the story is real, and it is grim. But a real slice of gladiators were free Roman citizens who walked in and volunteered, on purpose, for money, for fame, sometimes simply because their old life had quietly run out of better options. Occasionally, scandalously, even a few equestrians and senators' sons tried it, purely for the thrill, until the government passed laws specifically trying to stop them. Whichever door you came through, you did not start fighting until you swore an oath, out loud, in front of witnesses, called the adoration. The words survive and they are brutal. You promise to be burned if ordered, bound if ordered, whipped if ordered, and killed by the sword if ordered. You said that sentence about your own body on purpose before you ever picked up a weapon. If that sounds familiar, it should. Rome's own legionaries swore a version of this same kind of binding oath, the sacramentum, the one we walked through in its own episode of this series. The difference is brutal and specific. A soldier's oath bound him to Rome itself. Yours bound you to whoever currently owned your contract for a fixed number of fights, like a professional deal with hell quietly written into the fine print. Here is a detail the movies never tell you, and it should change how you picture your entire career. You did not fight every week, and you almost certainly did not fight every month. Most gladiators stepped onto the sand only a handful of times a year, sometimes as few as 2 or 3, because a trained fighter took months to build and was far too valuable to burn through on a casual schedule. Surviving tombstones actually kept score. Real gladiator graves list win counts, draws, and career totals, the way a modern athlete's stat line would, and plenty of them show fighters who lasted for years, racking up 10, 20, even 30 recorded bouts before retiring. A long gladiator career was rare, but it was not a myth. It was the whole point of doing this well. So if you are only fighting a few times a year, what fills the rest of your calendar? Drilling for hours every single day. Your practice sword and shield are built deliberately heavier than the real ones, sometimes twice the weight, so that on fight day your actual weapons feel almost light in your hands. You strike a fixed wooden post called the palace, over and over, under the eye of a weapons instructor whose entire job is footwork and form, nothing else. Your body type and your instincts decided your specialty early, net and trident for the quick and light, heavier armor for the strong and patient, and from that point on, that is the only style you drill. Once you swore that oath, the school owned your schedule, and the very first thing it controlled was your food. Ancient writers had an actual nickname for you and your fellow fighters: horderi, the barley men. Your diet ran mostly on grain, beans, and dried fruit, heavy, cheap, and shockingly effective at packing on protective bulk. And here is the detail that should stop you cold. Bioarchaeologists who studied the bones of gladiators buried in the ancient city of Ephesus found unusually dense, well-mineralized skeletons and traced it to something ancient sources actually mention in passing: a drink made from ash, plant ash, and sometimes bone ash, stirred into water or vinegar, packed with calcium your body needed to heal fast between fights. Call it the world's first sports recovery drink, engineered for men Rome legally considered barely people. Because you are not disposable, you are expensive. Training a gladiator takes months, sometimes years, and every serious school employs its own physician on retainer, purely to keep its fighters alive and fully functional. One of history's most famous physicians got his start exactly this way. A young doctor named Galen spent years treating gladiators in the city of Pergamon, and he later wrote that their wounds taught him more about the inside of the human body than any textbook ever had. You, a legally infamous fighter, had access to steadier, more attentive medical care than most free Romans would ever see across their entire lives. So who actually decides if you live or die today? Not you. Your own school, run by a manager called the Lannister, does not even own today's show. He has rented you out to a wealthy Roman called the editor, the man footing the bill for the whole event, and here is the number that changes everything. If you die on that sand, the editor typically owes your Lannister a payout worth many times your normal rental fee, which means, coldly, mathematically, your death is expensive, and your survival is usually the cheaper outcome for everyone involved. Before you even walk out, your weapons are formally inspected in front of witnesses, specifically to stop a corrupt promoter from rigging a blade. A referee then stands in the sand with you for the entire fight, ready to pause it over a foul. And the signal you have all heard of, the turned thumb, almost certainly did not mean what the movies taught you. Historians still argue over the exact gesture and what it signaled. What we do know is that the crowd could chant for mercy or blood, but the final call belonged to the man who was, underneath all the ceremony, running a business. We built an entire episode around exactly how staged and calculated these games really were. Go watch it because the editor's math went far beyond just this one fight. Here is a line you have definitely heard in a movie: "We who are about to die salute you." It sounds like the standard gladiator greeting, spoken before every single fight. It almost certainly was not. The one time a Roman writer actually recorded that exact line, it was shouted by condemned prisoners forced into a staged naval battle for the Emperor Claudius, a single desperate, one-time appeal, not a scripted daily ritual. Most working gladiators never said anything like it, because most working gladiators fully expected to walk off that sand alive. Hollywood took one grim sentence from one specific, unusual event and quietly stitched it onto every gladiator who ever lived. And every so often, the editors sponsoring the games and the most powerful man in Rome were literally the same person. The Emperor Commodus staged himself into the arena dressed as Hercules, fighting wounded or exhausted opponents or animals half dead from arrows fired earlier that same afternoon, and calling every appearance a personal triumph. He was paid an absurd fee from the imperial treasury for the privilege of pretending to risk his own life. Rome's own senators found it mortifying, an emperor cosplaying as one of the infamous for applause. But it tells you something real about your own profession. If the single most powerful man alive wanted to borrow your fame that badly, being a gladiator clearly meant something the law itself refused to admit. And despite the legal insult of it all, you could become a genuine celebrity. Graffiti scratched into the walls of Pompeii survives to this day, naming real fighters as heartthrobs, one nicknamed, quite literally, the sigh of the girls. Fans scraped the sweat and oil off gladiators after a bout and sold it in tiny vials as a beauty treatment and a good luck charm for a happy marriage. You fought under a stage name listed on a printed program with a fan following that could rival any modern athlete. Wealthy women scandalized their own families over gladiators. Emperors, including at least one who fought in the arena himself, attended your bouts in person. And none of that fame ever bought you the one thing it looked like it should: citizenship. And it was not only men out on that sand. Inscriptions and stone reliefs confirm real female gladiators, called gladiatrices, fighting in front of paying crowds, rare enough to be a novelty act, real enough that an emperor eventually banned them by name. Even Rome's most rigid social rules bent, occasionally, for a good show. They trained the same way you did, ate the same barley-heavy diet, and carried the exact same infamis status the moment they signed on. One more sign that this particular trade, fame and danger for legal personhood, was never really about gender at all. Now, the fight everyone actually came for. As a Rishi Arius, you carry a weighted net, a long trident, and almost no armor at all, just a shoulder guard and speed. Your traditional opponent is a secutor, boxed into a smooth, almost featureless helmet with two tiny eye holes, built specifically so your neck cannot snag on a visor, carrying a full shield and a short sword. It is quickness against armor, a fisherman against a fish, and the Romans knew exactly how funny that was. A surviving taunt has the Rishi Arius yelling at his opponent mid-fight. "I am not chasing you, I am chasing the fish." Why are you running, Gaul? 50,000 people watching, and you are out there working a punchline into your own life or death. A real match ran on rules, rounds, and a referee walking the sand right beside you, not a chaotic brawl. Your legs, your net, your timing, all of it had been drilled into you for months in that same training yard you slept 50 feet from last night. Now, fair question, doesn't all of this just prove the games were basically a slaughterhouse with better catering? And here is the honest, complicated answer. No, not usually, and that genuinely surprises most people. Estimates from surviving records suggest a working gladiator's odds of dying in any single match were far lower than pop culture assumes. Often somewhere close to 1 in 10, sometimes better, because a dead professional was a wasted investment, not a satisfying outcome for the man who paid for the show. That does not mean it was safe. Injuries were constant and real, and the death you did risk was permanent, public, and completely out of your hands. But the daily reality sat closer to a dangerous, contracted profession, fought rarely and prepared for constantly, than a rolling execution. And here is the part that should really sit with you. Fed like an elite athlete, treated by a personal physician, chanted for by name across the whole city, none of it changed your legal status back into a person Rome actually recognized. Even as a freeborn volunteer, the oath you swore branded you infamous, legally infamous, grouped alongside actors and prostitutes, barred from voting, from holding office, from most of the ordinary machinery of Roman citizenship, for as long as your contract ran, sometimes for the rest of your life. We saw a mirror version of exactly this trade in a Vestal's own episode. She traded ordinary womanhood for extraordinary, sacred privilege and lived under one specific named death penalty the entire time. You traded ordinary personhood for extraordinary fame and elite care and lived under a different one. To very different Romans, both discovering that Rome's most generous deals always came itemized with exactly what you had to give up first. But here is where I want to leave you, because it does not end on the sand. Survive your contract, and Rome hands you an actual wooden sword, called the rudis, the literal, physical symbol of your freedom, presented in front of the same crowd that once chanted your name. Plenty of freed gladiators walked away for good, and lived out the rest of their lives with money, a following, and a name people still recognized on the street. And here is the twist nobody expects. Some of the most famous ones, once fully free, volunteered to fight again anyway, for the money, for the fame, for a version of their old life they had genuinely, deliberately chosen to keep. And that bone ash drink you choked down for calcium? We are still chasing the exact same idea today, in sports science labs, electrolyte formulas, and recovery drinks built for professional athletes whose bodies are, in a very real sense, still somebody else's financial investment. We just finally stopped pretending those athletes are not citizens. So back to that stone cell before dawn, and the smell of barley porridge instead of fear. Now, you know what was actually sitting underneath that meal. An oath that signed away your own body out loud on purpose. A career fought only a handful of times a year, not weekly, tracked in wins on your own tombstone. Ours in a training yard, striking a wooden post, long before you ever faced a real opponent. A diet and a physician built to keep an expensive asset alive. A death that was rare specifically because it was bad business. A line about dying that you almost certainly never said. A fame that filled arenas and emptied nothing of your legal status. And every time a modern contract quietly treats a person's body like an asset to be managed, insured, and protected, right up until the moment it stops being profitable, you are standing, however faintly, in that stone cell before dawn, eating well, training hard, and still legally invisible. So the next time someone calls a professional athlete's body a business asset and means it as a compliment, you know exactly who taught the world to think that way first. Blame it on Rome.